Hi everyone, I'm Erin from Red Buffalo Coffee and Tea in Silverthorne, and these are your virtual home coffee brewing classes. Join me over the next couple of videos as we talk about the quintessential elements to brewing coffee better at home. Hi everyone, welcome back to your virtual cafe. Today we are going to talk about grinders and why it's important to get a good grinder, and also why it's important to grind fresh and to know what you're doing with your grinder. I have a variety of options in front of us today that you might be pretty used to. We have I have two hand grinders here. These come in a lot of different varieties. I have another one that I'll use for camping as well that goes into a plastic container to save on weight. I do believe if you're camping, do good coffee. That being said, instant coffee tastes exponentially better for every mile away from civilization you get and for every 10 degrees colder the weather drops. So, grinding fresh for your backpacking trip is very up to you, but in your kitchen, let's try to do it right, shall we? So, these are hand grind burr grinders. And I'm going to tell you the difference soon between a burr grinder and a blade grinder. Let's just get through our introduction. So we got two hand grind burr grinders. I have my electric conical burr grinder, and this is what so many households have. This is a blade grinder. We are going to start with our blade grinder. Our blade grinder has, as many of you will see, a blade, and it's just one blade and it swirls around like this. This is what I grew up with as a kid, and I remember the instructions from my parents when I made coffee for them was, well, just hold it down for 5 seconds, and if it needs a little more, you hold it down for another 5. It's not very scientific. These I really do not recommend if you want to do justice to your coffee, and let me tell you why. With a blade grinder, again, that whole idea of time, it makes a really inconsistent grind size. And as you will learn with coffee, everything is about consistency. So when you have this, some particles get really fine and some particles stay really large. And what that does is your really fine particles might over extract and get really bitter, and your larger particles might under extract and taste really sour. And as a whole, it just doesn't work out well together. Really do not recommend these grinders unless you're in a more dire situation. But they're really cheap. They're about $15 to $20. You'll probably even find one in your local thrift store. So these are an option because fresh ground coffee is still better than pre-ground coffee that's 6 months old and sitting in your freezer. We'll get to why that's bad. So if we're going to get rid of the blade grinder, we want to work then with our burr grinders. I love these burr grinders because they offer a consistent size. I'm gonna have you come and look at these here, and these are, check out my drawer, are burrs. You can see conical burrs in there. To make it finer or coarser, we adjust the settings here by making it up to make it coarser and screwing it down to make it finer. But all of the grind sizes will be one uniform size depending on what we are brewing for. Now, the electric one is just an electric version of this because when you are using a hand grinder, it takes a long time to grind just a little bit of coffee. So it's great. It's a fun thing to have. It's a beautiful piece to have in your kitchen. But when you actually want to be functional, you can go with these. Now, on the website, you will see we have an offer for a Baratza Encore grinder, which is a great entry-level home grinder. I really recommend them if you haven't gone to a burr grinder yet, to really go for one. It changes your life. And these ones have a remarkable ability to adjust for really good espresso, really fine, to really coarse for a percolator or a French press. So I've used my electric burr grinder now to show you the difference in grind sizes that we want to work with, because your grinder is only as good as if you're going to use the right grind for the right brew method. So let's just start from finest to coarsest. Here I have ground this coffee for espresso. You're going to see it's really soft. It's almost like a powdered sugar. Okay, So it's very small, but as you can see from a burr grinder, it is very uniform in size. So again, this is very much like a powdered sugar, very fine. So this is what I'm going to use for espresso. I've moved my grinder a couple settings over. I've moved from maybe setting 0 to setting 12. This is what I use for most of my pour overs. Okay, it's going to be more of like a granular sugar, maybe a little finer than a granular sugar. And you can see this, again, all uniform size there. The next size up is going to be what I'm going to use for a drip coffee machine. Maybe your Mr. Coffee at home, your Cuisinart, or if you're using a reusable Keurig, I would use this sort of grind setting as well. Play with your grinder to find the best setting to get this uniform size. This one's definitely closer to a sugar. Finally, then for your French press, you're going to have a much larger size, because if you have too fine of a French press, it's going to get through that filter and you're going to get that thick, bitter sludge at the bottom. So this coarse setting is really what I use for my French press at home. You're going to notice it's bigger than your pepper flakes. Okay, so really aim for a larger size. It's usually your most coarse setting that you're going to find on your espresso grinder. But let me tell you something, when you notice these sizes, we're going to talk for a sec about why it's so important to grind fresh before you roast. Before you brew. Why it's so important to grind fresh before you brew. Because, as you can see, a coffee bean is fairly large in comparison to the size of my grinds here. This means my surface area on the bean is actually very small. There's not a ton of product that is exposed to oxygen. As you move smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, you've exposed more surface area to oxygen. Essentially what you were doing is you were oxidizing your coffee, and a lot of these essential oils that are in here are starting to dry and evaporate. What you've done is if you grind your coffee even a few hours before you brew, you are starting to lose a lot of those oils and tastes, especially if you've now gone and bought ground coffee at a store and then you want to use it 6 weeks later. You've really just taken away a lot of those oils and a lot of those gases, and it's the equivalent of pouring yourself a flat beer or a flat soda. And no one likes a flat beer. So I really recommend, again, find the grinder that's going to work best for you in your kitchen or when you're camping. Grind fresh before use, because again, we don't want a fresh beer. Also, grind for the appropriate size for what you are doing so that you don't have, using French press, if it's too fine, it's going to be over extracted and bitter. If you use too coarse and you want to be brewing something fine like espresso, it's going to brew too quickly and taste sour. So those are why it's really important to know what you're grinding for and taste for that. Thank you so much for tuning in to your virtual home cafe class. We look forward to teaching you so much more about how to make the best coffee at home.